Hello, it's Fred with Utah Realty Advisors. Welcome to another in our series and segment on basic real estate. Today we're going to talk about the closing disclosure statement. A friend of mine asked me about the money and the math at the end, and part of that is a closing disclosure statement. This is also known as a HUD-1. It's known as a settlement statement. You receive it from the government as a closing disclosure acknowledgement. But at the end of the day, it's a summary of the math in the transaction. And so let's just talk a little bit about the math and how it's structured. There should be a link below to an actual form, as well as some other useful information if you'd like to go into further reading. As always, the boring stuff. I'm licensed as a real estate broker in the state of Utah. So my experience is basically with Utah transactions. That includes Utah law, Utah finance rules, things like that. Please check with your local state. Please check with your local real estate broker or your mortgage professional for some fine-tuned stuff. So the closing disclosure is a summary of the math in the transaction, and I'm going to cheat occasionally and look at one. So generally, page 1 shows the summary, the sales price, which would also include the down payment amount, would include the terms of the note, which is your promise to repay, and the disclosure statement as far as that goes would include the interest rate, the amount borrowed, the terms, whether there's a prepayment penalty or other conditions as far as the borrowing. It'll also show you the calculation on how they came up with that, which again refers back to the interest rate. Page 2 is a summary, beginning of the summary of the individual charges associated with the loan. In the first group on page 2, you'll see loan closing costs. Closing costs would include brokerage fees, loan brokerage fees, not real estate brokerage fees. Origination fees is another term that you might see. There would also be a summary of the credit report charges, appraisal fees, those kinds of things. Then it'll also include the title closing fees, recording fees at the county recorder's office, if that's the way your particular area records the transaction in the government offices. There's some title endorsements. That's a whole other segment on what title gets you. Then it lists other costs that might be associated with the transaction. If there's a mortgage insurance premium, we'll talk a little bit more in another segment about mortgage insurance and mortgage insurance premiums, those kinds of things. Includes your property taxes, homeowner's insurance or hazard insurance. Usually, if you are doing a transaction where you're not putting down 20% or more, then you are required to pay through your mortgage payment, your mortgage insurance, and your property taxes. These are collected for you by the lender and paid on your behalf whenever the taxing authority sends out the bill or whenever your hazard insurance is due. So basically, there's a summary of the charges for loan costs and other costs on page 2. Then they calculate your cash to close. That's generally pretty easy. You have the sales price. You have what your qualified borrow amount is on your loan, and the difference is your down payment and what you're going to put as a down payment. Generally speaking, a minimum down payment is 3.5%. Sometimes it's a little bit more than that. Sometimes it's a little bit less. Those are all particulars that you should discuss with your mortgage loan originator. Then you also have a summary of other transaction costs, sales price. Again, we talked about that, closing costs. You get credits on this page, on page 2, if you've deposited an earnest money or if you've prepaid for your appraisal fee or for your credit report. It lists your credits. You'll also, in most transactions, you'll see a credit on this page for the period of time the seller has owned the property and they are paying their property taxes that are due based on, again, your individual county or state and how they record and charge your property taxes. Page 3 goes into a few more details. If there's other loan closing costs that are associated, those would also be any real estate commissions, any other charges or fees that are associated with the transaction. And then starts the boring stuff. Page 4 and 5 gives you all the government definitions of what these things are and what they mean. It lists how much interest you'll pay if you are paying a mortgage. Obviously, you're going to pay interest over a period of time, and the government wants you to know how much cost is associated with the money you've borrowed. And that's another association, another topic we'll talk about is where the money goes and who the players are and how it gets to you and how it enables you to buy a house. So we're trying to keep the videos to within 5 minutes or so, maybe 7 minutes or less. So I just want to thank you for taking the time to go through this. It was a pretty quick flyover version. We can get into some details. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. As always, I greatly appreciate the introduction to those you care about so that I can lead, guide, and protect them in what is arguably a very significant process and transaction in a person's life. So thanks again. I appreciate you taking the time to look at the video. Have a good day.